The day after Catherine of Aragon died, a man was sent to open her body, and he wasn't a physician. He was a candle maker. What he found inside her chest was so wrong that he washed it 3 times, just to be sure his own eyes weren't lying to him. History remembers her as the pious first wife who stood quietly aside while Henry VIII tore England away from Rome. The truth is a 24-year siege, and she never once surrendered. She died still signing her name as Queen. That was treason. She did it anyway. Catalina of Aragon was born on the 16th of December, 1485, in the Archbishop's palace at Alcalá de Henares. That same year, on a field in Leicestershire, a Welsh claimant killed Richard III and made himself Henry VII. The Tudor dynasty, and the woman who would nearly break it, began in the same 12 months. Her parents were not ordinary royalty. Ferdinand of Aragon and Isabella of Castile had welded 2 kingdoms into Spain, finished a 700-year war against the Moors, and, in the year Catalina turned 6, gambled a fortune on a Genoese sailor named Columbus. Her mother ran a war and a kingdom at the same time, and did it while pregnant. Catherine watched a woman command armies before she could read properly. That was the model she was raised on. A queen was not decoration. A queen was infrastructure. She was the youngest of 5 surviving children, and every one of them was currency. Her sister Juana would be married into the Habsburgs, and later locked away for decades, while her father, her husband, and her son each took turns governing in her name. Most historians now regard the story of her total madness as at least partly manufactured by the men who profited from it. Royal daughters in that family were valuable and disposable, and Catherine grew up knowing both. Her own price was set when she was 3 years old. In March 1489, the Treaty of Medina del Campo betrothed her to Arthur, Prince of Wales, a toddler on an island she had never seen. She took the pomegranate as her personal badge. The fruit of Granada, the city her parents had conquered, and, in the symbolism of the age, the emblem of fertility. Split open, it spills seeds without end. No badge in English history ever aged worse. She landed at Plymouth in October 1501. After a crossing so violent, her fleet had to shelter twice. On the 14th of November, she married Arthur at St. Paul's Cathedral. Both were 15. The 10-year-old boy who escorted her up the aisle beaming was the groom's little brother, Henry. 5 months later, Arthur was dead. He died at Ludlow Castle on the 2nd of April, 1502, aged 15. English records never specify the illness. Catherine caught it too, and very nearly went with him. The marriage had lasted 4 months and 19 days. And then there was the boast. 28 years later, at the trial that would decide everything, a man named Anthony Willoughby testified that on the morning after the wedding night, Arthur had swaggered out and announced he had been this night in the midst of Spain. It's a devastating line. It's also a memory produced almost 3 decades after the fact by a witness in a court where the king desperately needed exactly that testimony. and Catherine swore, under the seal of confession, that the marriage was never consummated. Historians have argued about that one sentence for 500 years. That boast, real or invented, was the loaded gun sitting on the table for the rest of her life. What came next was 7 years of engineered humiliation. Catherine was a widow at 16, stranded in England, and instantly worthless to 2 kings who had already spent her value. Half her dowry had been paid. Ferdinand refused to send the rest until Henry VII confirmed a new match. Henry VII refused to confirm anything until the money arrived. And while 2 of Europe's shrewdest men played chicken with each other, the daughter of the richest monarchs in Christendom sat in Durham House on the Thames, selling her own plate and jewels to buy food for her servants. Her letters to her father from those years are genuinely bleak. She writes about debt, about clothes she can't replace, about being abandoned. Some historians read them as despair edging toward the suicidal, though no explicit threat survives in the primary texts, and she was also, always, a Spanish princess who knew how to write a letter designed to move her father. It didn't move him. In 1507, Ferdinand's solution to his daughter's starvation was a promotion. He appointed her his ambassador to the English court. She is believed to be the first woman in European history to hold the post. She was still broke. She was simply broke with diplomatic credentials. A papal dispensation covering a marriage to Arthur's brother had been obtained back in 1503. It sat in a drawer for 6 years while she starved politely. Then, in April 1509, the old king died, and everything reversed in a matter of weeks. Henry VIII was 17 years old, 6'2", athletic, musical, spectacularly vain, and utterly infatuated with the Spanish widow 6 years his senior. On the 11th of June 1509, they married privately at the Observant Friars' Church in Greenwich. On the 24th of June, they were crowned together at Westminster Abbey. She was 23. He was still, by a matter of weeks, a teenager. For the next 15 years they were, by the account of nearly every observer who saw them together, genuinely happy. He wore her colours. He jousted under the name Sir Loyal Heart. He left her in charge when he travelled. The schoolbook version, a cold, doomed dynastic slog from day one, is simply wrong. 7 months into that fairy tale, the first catastrophe arrived, and they buried it in secret, in the space of 3 weeks. On the 31st of January 1510, at roughly 33 weeks, Catherine was delivered of a stillborn daughter. Her chancellor's letter describes a delivery so quiet it barely registered as labor. She felt, he wrote, no other pain except that one knee pained her the night before. The child was hidden from the entire court. Only the king, 2 Spanish women, a physician, and the chancellor knew. Then it got stranger. Her physician told her she had been carrying twins, and that one child remained. Her belly was still swollen. So the Queen of England went into confinement a second time for a baby that did not exist. in front of a court that had never been told about the first one. Her own father wasn't informed until May. She was 24 years old, and she had just learned that in England her body was a state secret. The next year looked like redemption. On the 1st of January 1511, she gave birth to a living son, Henry, Duke of Cornwall. There were bonfires, there were bells. In February, his father staged an enormous tournament at Westminster to celebrate the heir, riding as Sir Loyal Heart with his wife watching from the stands. The baby died on the 22nd of February. He had lived 52 days. His father's celebration tournament had finished 9 days earlier. And here is where the story turns from tragic to genuinely astonishing, because in 1513, Catherine of Aragon won a war. Henry sailed for France, chasing military glory, leaving his wife as Regent of England with full authority. The Scots invaded. Catherine, pregnant again, signed the orders, arranged the supply, oversaw the raising of reserve forces, and rode north herself while her commanders marched. On the 9th of September 1513, the English army destroyed the Scottish host at Flodden. James IV of Scotland was killed on the field. It was the most complete English victory of the entire reign. Catherine had his bloodied coat cut up and sent across the Channel to her husband, with a note suggesting he might like it as a banner. Consider what that means. The woman Henry would eventually discard for failing to produce a fighting man defended his kingdom, beat a king in the field, and mailed him the evidence. About a week after Flodden, around the 17th of September, she gave birth again. The child, a son, was either stillborn or died within hours. A Venetian report claims he was briefly alive, and the accounts don't fully agree. She had won the battle of the century and lost another baby inside the same fortnight. In November 1514, another stillborn son at 8 months. Then, on the 18th of February 1516, at Greenwich, a daughter, Mary, alive. Healthy, she would stay that way. When the Venetian ambassador offered condolences that the child wasn't a boy, Henry brushed it off cheerfully. If it was a daughter this time, by God's grace the sons will follow. The sons did not follow. On the 10th of November 1518, Catherine delivered a stillborn daughter in the 8th month. It was her last recorded pregnancy. She was 32. 6 documented pregnancies, 1 surviving child. That number matters because the popular version inflates it wildly. You'll still hear about a dozen or 20 miscarriages. In 1984, the obstetrician Sir John Dewhurst went through the surviving Spanish Venetian and English dispatches and established the real total at 6, not dozens, 6, which is somehow worse because each of the 6 can be dated and named and counted. Underneath the cloth of gold and the jewels, she had begun wearing something else. Her confessors reported that beneath the royal gowns she wore the coarse habit of the Third Order of St. Francis next to the skin. By 1519, Henry had a healthy son, just not with her. Bessie Blount, one of the Queen's own maids of honor, gave him a boy named Henry Fitzroy. And in 1525, the king made that 6-year-old illegitimate child Duke of Richmond and Somerset the highest peerage in England. His legitimate daughter got a household in Wales. His bastard son got a dukedom and a coronet. The message was not subtle. By his own later account, Henry stopped sharing his wife's bed around 1524. Though no contemporary letter pins the date, and he had every reason afterwards to make the number look bigger. And in 1527, after 18 years of marriage, he suddenly discovered that the whole thing had been a sin the entire time. The argument came out of Leviticus. A man who takes his brother's wife shall be childless. Henry decided this explained everything. The dead babies weren't misfortune. They were divine punishment. Never mind that the Pope had dispensed the marriage in 1503, and that Catherine insisted the first marriage had never been consummated, which made the entire objection irrelevant. There was also an inconvenient verse in Deuteronomy that commands a man to marry his dead brother's widow and raise up children for him. Henry's theologians managed not to dwell on it. England's new biblical scholar had a remarkable talent for finding exactly the verse he needed and misplacing the one he didn't. There was a second reason, and she had been serving in Catherine's own household. Anne Boleyn was clever, French educated, and unwilling to be a mistress. To be fair to her, and history has rarely bothered, Anne was a young woman inside a machine that would eventually kill her too. The architect of what happened to Catherine was never Anne. It was the man who spent 9 years insisting he was the victim. Catherine was informed by her husband, in person, in June 1527, that they had been living in sin for 18 years and must separate. She burst into tears. Then she started fighting, and she did not stop for the rest of her life. Cardinal Wolsey, the fixer who had never failed the king at anything, was told to make it go away. It took him 2 years to arrange a legatine court on English soil, with a papal legate, Cardinal Campeggio, sent from Rome to hear it. A man with explicit instructions to delay everything for as long as humanly possible. The court opened at Blackfriars on the 18th of June, 1529. Catherine appeared and immediately challenged whether it had any authority over her at all. 3 days later, on the 21st of June, she did the single most audacious thing any English queen has ever done in a courtroom. Summoned before 2 cardinals, she stood, ignored the judges entirely, and walked across the floor of the court. She knelt at her husband's feet in front of the assembled bishops, lawyers and nobility of England. In accented English, she asked him what she had ever done to offend him. She reminded him she had been his true wife for 20 years. She pointed out that she was a foreigner with no impartial counsel in his kingdom. She asked for justice, appealed her cause directly to Rome, rose, curtsied, and walked out. The crier called her name 3 times. She never turned around. The most detailed account comes from George Cavendish, Wolsey's own gentleman, usher. writing decades later from his notes, so the exact phrasing has been polished by time. But the diplomats in the room all confirm the essentials. She knelt, she appealed, she left. By kneeling to her husband instead of the court, she had made every man in that room irrelevant. The trial collapsed on the 23rd of July with no verdict, and the case was recalled to Rome. Wolsey, the man who could fix anything, was stripped of everything within months and died the following year on his way to face a treason charge. She had beaten them, and it cost her absolutely everything. Henry stopped arguing and started erasing. In the summer of 1531, he left Windsor with Anne and simply never came back. There was no scene and no farewell. After 22 years of marriage, the Queen woke up, and her husband was gone. She never saw him again. Then he took the child. Catherine was ordered from court and forbidden further contact with her daughter Mary. That was 1531. Catherine had 4.5 years left to live, and she spent every one of them writing letters begging for one visit. Not custody, a visit. Every single request was refused. Mother and daughter never saw each other again. And in those same years, alone, stripped of her title and her child, Catherine kept doing something the ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, found almost unbearable to report. She went on personally sewing Henry's shirts and sending them to him exactly as she had for 20 years. Anne, when she found out, was reportedly furious. Catherine never explained herself. It may have been love. It may have been the most disciplined insult in Tudor history. In January 1533, Anne was pregnant, and the paperwork suddenly had a deadline. On the 23rd of May 1533, Thomas Cranmer, freshly installed as Archbishop of Canterbury, convened a special court at Dunstable Priory, 20-odd miles from where Catherine was living. In a session she did not attend, and where nobody spoke for her, he declared that the marriage of Henry and Catherine had never legally existed. 23 years, 11 months and 12 days, annulled by a bureaucrat in an afternoon. Catherine was informed that she was no longer queen. Her new style was Princess Dowager of Wales, Arthur's widow, which meant conceding that the boy's boast had been true. She refused. She went on calling herself queen. When documents arrived, addressed to the Princess Dowager, she reportedly had the title struck out with her own hand. Under the Act of Succession of 1534, which declared her daughter a bastard, that refusal was treasonous. Men were executed for less, and she knew it. So Henry tried the one weapon that had worked on her before. He made her poor and cold again. She was moved from house to house, each smaller and damper than the last. Ampthill, Buckton, a low, wet place that made her ill. Finally, Kimbolton Castle, a fortified manor in Huntingdonshire. Her household was cut back. Her Spanish servants were removed where possible. When officials came to move her, local crowds reportedly gathered in silent hostility. The story that villagers turned out with pitchforks is their color, but the sympathy itself is well attested. The English public never stopped taking her side, which infuriated the king more than anything she actually said. At Kimbolton, she withdrew into 2 rooms. She had her food cooked in her own chamber by her own servants, and she bolted the door from the inside. She was, according to reports relayed by chappies, convinced someone was going to poison her. That detail sits in the record like a fuse. She had one thing left that Henry couldn't confiscate, and centuries later it came out of the ground. In 2019, a metal detectorist named Charlie Clark was searching a field in Warwickshire when he found a heavy pendant of 24-carat gold and enamel. It took years of analysis before it was announced in February 2023. An early 16th century royal jewel decorated with the entwined initials H and K, the Tudor rose, Catherine's pomegranate, and a motto. 2 words. 2 shores always. Researchers still debate exactly what it was for, most likely a prize or pageant piece from the years when Henry was still riding as Sir Loyal Heart. What isn't in doubt is that a man once spent a fortune in gold to have the word always hung around a stranger's neck with her badge on it, and that same man later refused a dying woman one afternoon with her daughter. That refusal came in the last week of her life. Through December 1535, she declined fast. She couldn't keep food down. She couldn't sleep lying flat. Chapuis. The imperial ambassador who had spent 9 years fighting her corner, and who wept when permission finally came, was allowed to ride to Kimbolton at the start of January 1536. He stayed 4 days and left on the 6th believing she was rallying. One more person arrived. Maria de Salinas had come to England with Catherine in 1501 as a girl. Now Lady Willoughby, denied permission to visit, she rode to Kimbolton anyway. Arrived after dark, having fallen from her horse, talked her way through the gate and never left the room again. Catherine died on the afternoon of the 7th of January, 1536. She was 50 years and 22 days old. Mary was not there. Mary had been forbidden. Now, the famous part, and it's almost certainly fiction. Nearly every retelling ends with a beautiful farewell letter to Henry, signing off as his most dear lord, king, and husband. It first appears in later printed sources. Chapuis, who was at her bedside days earlier and reported everything, never mentions it. Modern biographers regard it as invented. The single most quoted thing Catherine of Aragon ever wrote, she probably never wrote. When the news reached the court, Henry and Anne both appeared dressed in yellow, and Anne reportedly tipped the messenger handsomely. English chroniclers read it as Open's celebration. There's a lingering argument that yellow was a colour of royal mourning in Catherine's Spain, which, if true, means that in the act of flaunting their relief, they accidentally honoured her in the custom of her own country. She was buried on the 29th of January at Peterborough Abbey, with the rights of a Dowager Princess of Wales, not a queen. Her husband did not attend. Her daughter was not permitted to. But the strangest thing in Catherine's story happened after the coffin was closed, and it starts with a candle maker. On the king's express command, her body was opened the day after she died at Kimbolton, with no waiting and no physician present. The man who did it was a local chandler. His assistant was a plumber. Neither had any medical training whatsoever. What they found, they reported to her confessor, Bishop Jorge de Athequa. Every organ in her body was sound, perfectly healthy, except the heart. The heart was black. Black all the way through, and there was a black growth clinging to the outside of it. He washed it. It was still black. He washed it 3 times. It never changed. Athequa told her physician, Dr. de la Sarre. De la Sarre's verdict was immediate. Those symptoms, that appearance meant poison. The account traveled to Chapuis's secretary and into a dispatch to the emperor dated the 21st of January 1536. And here is the detail that has fed 400 years of rumor. No English record of that examination exists. None. The only account of what was found inside the Queen of England travels entirely through Spanish hands, because the king who ordered it never wrote it down. So the story hardened. Henry poisoned her. Anne poisoned her. Everyone knew. Except no poisoner was ever named, no plot was ever documented, and no confession ever surfaced in the decades of gossip that followed. Decades in which Anne Boleyn was beheaded and half the court was interrogated about everything else. Beginning with the physician Norman Moore in 1885 and confirmed by modern biographers working from the Spanish archives, medicine gave the black heart a different name: secondary melanotic sarcoma. Cancer, most likely melanoma, spread to the heart. It explains the healthy organs. It explains the growth. It explains why washing did nothing at all. Her tomb at Peterborough has never been opened. No exhumation has ever been authorized. No DNA test has ever been done, and will likely never have more than a candlemaker's word for any of it. Which leaves the bleakest fact in the whole story. The one atrocity Henry VIII was accused of for 4 centuries is the one he didn't commit. He took her crown, her income, her name, and her only child, and moved her through 4 damp houses in 3 years. And while he was doing it, something inside her chest was already killing her. He didn't need the poison. So, was Catherine of Aragon the immovable woman who beat the most dangerous king in Europe by simply refusing to move? Or a queen who spent her last 9 years fighting for a title while the daughter she never saw again paid the bill? Thanks for watching History's Hidden Lives. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us.